Just Life, a programme from Radio Maria England. On today's programme, we have Father John Boles. Father John Boles is the director of the Columban Missionaries in Britain, and he's spent 3 decades in Latin America. And today, he's sharing with us an insider's account of the incredible 16th-century miracle of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Recently, Father John was featured on Just Life when he shared his amazing missionary adventures in Peru with us. These episodes, as well as all about the Columban Missionaries, can be found as a podcast on Radio Maria England, podcasts on Spotify, Google, Anchor, iPlayer, all those different players. But now you've got Father John Boles live here Wednesday, May 11th. Father John, I'm passing over the microphone and our listeners to you.
Eleanor, great to be on the programme again, and thanks for inviting me once more. The last time I was on This Life, I touched on the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico. And of course, now we're in Mary's month, the month of May. So I thought we might return to that and look at it in a little more detail and drawing out some conclusions that might be new and surprising for yourself and your listeners. First of all, take you back to the apparition itself, and taking you back both in time and in space. So if you can imagine yourself in 1531, the year 1531, 500 years ago almost, on the other side of the Atlantic, on the edge of what is now Mexico City. It's just 10 years since the Spanish invasion and occupation of the Aztec Empire and the destruction of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, by Hernan Cortes, the commander of the Spanish troops, and the reconstruction of the city as Mexico City. A few years later, Franciscan missionaries arrived and began the conversion of Mexico from native religions to Catholicism. And one of their very first converts was an Aztec peasant by the name of Cuauhtlacoatzin, who was instructed and baptized and given the Spanish Catholic name of Juan Diego. Now, Juan Diego became a very faithful member of the early Catholic community in Mexico, and frequently he went over the hills from his house to the Franciscan mission, a place called Tlatelolco on the edge of Mexico City, to receive further instruction as a catechist. And one day, 1531, he was wandering happily over the heathland, separating his home village from the Spanish mission, when he smelt strangely flowers which shouldn't really be blooming there, and heard bird song from birds that shouldn't really be there, and then spied a lady who also shouldn't be there, especially as she was dressed in regal finery. So he approached this strange lady and was informed in his own language that she was the Virgin Mary, Our Lady, Mother of Jesus, Mother of God, of whom he'd heard so much in his catechetical classes. Overawed, he heard in silence her message, asking him to divert slightly, and instead of going to the Franciscans in Tlatelolco, to go to the bishop himself in the Cathedral of Mexico City, Bishop Zumarraga, and say to him that the Mother of God had appeared and wanted a shrine to be built on that place, on that hill by the name of Tepeyac, to be built so that those who were in need and distress could pray to her son through her intercession. So off went Juan Diego Cuauhtlacoatzin to the bishop's house, was visited by the bishop, and as you imagine, he was sent off with a flea in his ear. Who on earth is this ignorant peasant coming to me with this cock and bull story? So downcast, back he went up to the hill of Tepeyac, and there waiting for him was Our Lady, the Virgin Mary, who said, "What happened?" And Juan Diego said, "Well, you can imagine what happened. He didn't believe me. He sent me off, saying I was a person of no importance." So the lady replied, well, for me, you are a person of importance. You are the chosen one. So you go back to him and you tell him again what I've said. And don't worry, because my son has been working on him. He'll receive you with a little bit more of belief this time. So back poor old Cuatlacoatzin Juan Diego goes to Bishop Zumarraga, who indeed receives him this time a little more cordially and doesn't entirely reject him, but says, go back again. You can imagine poor old Juan Diego, what he's feeling by this time. Go back again and ask the lady for a sign. Then I'll believe your story. Off he goes. Third time, third apparition. There's the lady waiting patiently. Yes, he wants a sign, does he? Right, well, come back again tomorrow. Poor old Juan Diego has to go back the following day. Then I shall give you a sign. Right. Cuatlacoatzin goes back home. Juan Diego goes back home. Their disaster strikes. He's living at home with his uncle. His parents are dead. Lives with his uncle. And his uncle is gravely ill. There's an epidemic raging in Mexico. We'll come back to this later. It's significant. And his uncle is very ill. So Juan Diego, Cuatlacoatzin, can't go back to meet the Virgin as planned, to meet the apparition as planned. He has to stay and look after his uncle, who's getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Finally, looks as though he's at death's door. So he asks Juan Diego to go and get one of the Franciscans to come and give him what we called in those days extreme unction, the last rite. Off goes Juan Diego, embarrassed at not having been able to meet the lady as scheduled. He takes a different route, but the lady is there before him. She, as it were, cuts him off at the pass and says, Juan Diego, Cuatlacoatzin, where were you yesterday? I was waiting for you. So he explains the situation, and she says, look, and these are the famous words that are inscribed in the Basilica of Guadalupe now, do you not know that I am your mother? Why didn't you not come to me? Why didn't you explain the situation? And I would have done something about it. But don't worry, I've done something about it. I've already talked to my son, and your uncle is cured. Now, what's this about a sign? You see these flowers behind me, these flowers that shouldn't be growing in this place at this time, gather them, put them in your poncho, the mantle which Aztec peasants always had around their shoulders and which they carry to this day, and take those flowers to Bishop Zumarraga. So he does just that, takes the flowers to Bishop Zumarraga, opens up his poncho. The flowers cascade onto the floor, and there on his poncho is imprinted the image of the lady. This is the sign that the bishop has been waiting for. He falls to his knees, apologizes to Juan Diego, and promises to build a small church on that site. They build the church. Meanwhile, I should say, Juan Diego Cuatlacoatzin goes back home, and yes, his uncle is miraculously cured after receiving a vision from a strange but beautiful lady. Fancy that. After a year, there's a procession to this church, and an Indian who's been injured in an accident and he's dying is brought to it and is miraculously cured. From that date, the shrine is declared Shrine of Our Lady of the Americas, and given the name Guadalupe. Now, we'll come back to this later on because, as I stated at the beginning, this place where it took place was Tepayac, nothing of Guadalupe. Nevertheless, that's the name of the shrine that Bishop Zumarraga gives it. From then on, its fame grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, and let me tell you now that if you're asked which is the most popular Catholic shrine in the world, you can answer. It's not Lourdes, it's not Fatima, it's not Jerusalem, it's not even Rome. The greatest Catholic shrine in the world, in terms of people visiting it, is the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe on the edge of Mexico City. Just before lockdown, they received 22 million visitors in 1 year. Just think of that. So those are the bare bones, those are the basic facts. But as often in our Catholic religion, what is more interesting, more important, are the facts behind the facts, the story behind the story. And for that, we need to look at the background of Our Lady, the same lady in the Gospels, and the background to Juan Diego Cuatlatlatzin and his time and the conquest of Mexico by the Spanish. So I'll leave you on tenterhooks for that. We'll be coming back in a few moments. And I've selected a few pieces of music to accompany this talk, because one thing that the Virgin emphasized throughout the apparitions was that you should always be joyful. And that's why many of the hymns to Our Lady, and particularly Our Lady of Guadalupe, are joyful. Myself, I had the opportunity to visit the Basilica of Guadalupe with all those throngs way back in 1983. And it was fascinating later on connecting the Lady of the Apparition in 1531 with the lady we meet in the Gospels. And more you get parallels that could be drawn out and which aren't always immediately obvious. Let's look at those references for a while, starting with the oldest Gospel, which is St. Mark's. I know it's not the first in chronological order in the Bible, but yes, St. Mark is the oldest Gospel. And St. Mark says about Our Lady, nothing, absolutely nothing. He's silent about Our Lady. There's no miraculous birth, there's no magi, there's no shepherds. Mark's story begins with Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist. And his mother is only mentioned in passing in 2 or 3 obscure references. Let's go on to Matthew, written about 30 years later. Matthew doesn't have much more to say about Mary either. She appears, but she's silent, doesn't say a word, not a dicky bird. You have the Annunciation, but in Matthew, the Annunciation is to Joseph, not to Mary. The agreement about the conception is between the angel and Joseph. Poor old Mary is nothing more than a passive biological vessel. And later on, in mute silence, she accepts the instructions of her husband Joseph. He says, we're going off to Egypt, and off they go. Then he says, we're coming back from Egypt, and back they come. Then he says, we're not going back to our home in Bethlehem, we're going up to Nazareth. So she toddles off with him, babe in arms. So if all we had was Mark and Matthew to go on, there'd be no veneration of Mary. There'd be no Mariology. There'd be no Radio Maria, dare I say. All our faith in Jesus regarding his mother comes from the next 2 Gospels. Let's look at John, the last Gospel to be written. There, Mary is a protagonist, only in 2 occasions, but 2 very important occasions. Right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, she's there at the marriage feast of Cana. She's compassionate, seeing the embarrassment of the host when the wine's running out, knowing Jesus' mind better than he knows it himself, telling the servants that in spite of Jesus' reticence, he is going to perform a miracle. She's there and with the disciples at the end of the feast, having thoroughly enjoyed the feast, who believes in Jesus and follows him to Capernaum, where he sets up his centre of operations for his public ministry. He then appears with Our Lady again at the end of the Gospel. If you remember, he's on the cross, the lovely disciple is there, his mother is there, and he says to the beloved disciple who represents the early church, this is your mother. So his mother is not only his mother, she's now the church's mother. She's Jesus' representative after his death and presumably after his resurrection ascension with the church, his community on earth. Confirming that, we have Luke. Luke really is where Mary comes into her own. The Annunciation in Luke is not to Joseph, as it is in Matthew, but to Mary. Mary responds with firmness, intelligence, and faith. She then immediately goes on mission anticipating Jesus' mission, visiting her relative Elizabeth. And then she comes out with her greatest speech in the Bible, a magnificent speech, which indeed is called the Magnificat, which reiterates the concern of the Old Time or Old Testament prophets, not just for faith in God, but also for social reform, social justice. She's furious at the way that the poor are being oppressed and exploited in her time, just as Jesus will be. And with firmness and with passion, but always with joy, insists that God in the end will scatter the proud in the thoughts of their hearts, will bring down the powerful from their thrones, will lift up the lowly, and will fill the hungry with good things. This is the Mary that we're going to meet at Guadalupe. And the apparition in Guadalupe only has significance in the context of the Magnificat in Luke. And later on in Luke, there we have Mary in the presentation, the birth of Jesus, the presentation of Jesus in the temple. Simeon saying, a sword shall pierce your heart, not just a sword of sorrow. The sword also means wisdom. It's Mary who will understand more than anybody else the significance of Jesus' life and words and mission. And also, marvelously, in Luke, who also wrote the Acts of the Apostles, we have Mary, the mother of Jesus, at the birth of the church at Pentecost. She's one of the people present at Pentecost, which we'll be celebrating here in a couple of weeks' time, of course, in the Universal Church. So Mary present at the birth of Jesus, Mary present at the birth of Jesus' first community, Mary present at the birth of the church. Mother of God, Mother of Jesus, Mother of the church. This is the Mary of Guadalupe. And a lot of these strands that I've just pointed to in the Gospels will become clear again when we revisit the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe or Tepeyac later in the programme. But now we have to move on to the context of Our Lady of Guadalupe in her time, her historical and geographical time, the place where she appeared, why she appeared, how she appeared, to whom did she appear, and against what background did she appear. And the great background is the Spanish conquest. So, Helena, if you have another piece of music, we can take a breather and prepare ourselves to look at the context of the apparition in the time of the Spanish conquest. I've prepared there two pieces of music by Luis Escoy, who's a religious songwriter from Peru, where I served for 25 years. And again, his songs, although based on the suffering of the Peruvian people, are full of joy, because that's something Mary kept reiterating. Yes, I'm here with you in times of distress, of difficulty, of death and destruction, but we must always maintain hope, because life will overcome death. We will triumph, and therefore, in spite of everything, we must be happy, we must be joyful. And so Ascoy's songs are happy and joyful.
Hallelujah.
And that's the message we get from Jesus, and we get from his mother constantly. Yes, there's going to be suffering. Yes, there's going to be oppression. Yes, there's going to be death and destruction. But we're with you throughout, and with us you will triumph. So never lose hope and never lose that sense of joy.
Amen. All right, let's continue on with Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Well, I've mentioned death and destruction. There was plenty of that about at the time we're talking of. 1531, Mexico, 10 years after the Spanish conquest. Let's look at the Spanish conquest. Herman Cortes was one of the first conquistadores, one of the first conquerors, who arrived 10 years before in 1521, and he was not on a mission. Well, not as a mission as we understand it on Radio Maria. He was not on a religious mission. He wasn't coming, whatever he might have stated subsequently, neither to civilize nor to evangelize. He came in search of booty, of wealth. He was there to pillage and to conquer. He'd heard rumors of a great civilization in the highlands of Mexico, the Aztec civilization. Now, let's be clear about this. The Aztecs were no saints. I mean, they also were an empire that had grown through conquest. And a lot of the conquered peoples of Mexico were pretty irritated with the Aztecs, to put it mildly. However, the Aztecs did live in harmony with their society and with their ecology, with their country. They had a magnificent agricultural system, a terrific drainage and irrigation system that meant that there was no hunger in this country. And the country at this time, the demographers have estimated, had a population of 30, that's 30 million. 30 million, which is astonishing for that part of the world at that time, because of the rich agricultural base that was maintained by the peace, all right, sometimes a peace enforced by force, of the Aztecs. Into this situation, into this context, into this background, explode the Spanish conquistadores. They make an alliance with some of the Aztec subject peoples. They march on the great capital of the Aztecs, Tenochtitlan, which is actually built in a lake where Mexico City now stands. They take the city, they hold it, there's a battle, and the Aztec emperor, Moctezuma, is killed. Finally, the Spanish are forced out. They have to retreat. But then something remarkable happens. The Indians, the Aztecs, start dying in their hundreds, in their thousands. Later, it'll be in their millions. Cortes sees this as a sign from God, that God is with him in spite of his cruelty. God is with him. In fact, the ally is smallpox, brought by those same Spanish conquistadores, a disease from Europe against which the Native Americans have no resistance. And many of the defenders of Tenochtitlan die of smallpox. Others are weakened. So Cortes just waits and waits and waits. And when he sees that the population, the defenders, are demoralized, he attacks again. This time he's successful. He overcomes Aztec resistance, proclaims victory, captures the last Aztec leader, Cuauhtemoc, who he later, of course, has executed, and slowly extends Spanish rule throughout Mexico. After 3 years, in come finally missionaries who belatedly begin a conversion of the local population to Catholicism. And the bishop is appointed to Tenochtitlan, now renamed Mexico City, Bishop Zumarraga, of whom we've already met at the beginning of the program. The Spanish completely destroy the existing social system that's been run by the Aztecs, but which also has evolved over hundreds of years in Mesoamerica. They install their own system, which basically consists of Spanish landlords, and the native population are corralled into being their forced laborers. Not strictly speaking slaves, although in the end there's not much difference between forced labor and slavery, because they're made to work on these huge agricultural estates, but now not for subsistence, but also now for profit. And this continues until the Spanish find further south, in South America, sources of even greater profit, the mines of gold and silver in what we now know as Bolivia. Meanwhile, this agricultural dictatorship, or autocracy, as you might call it, continues with tremendous abuses by the Spanish towards the local population, often denounced by the church, it should be said, particularly an outstanding saint of the church, Bartolome de las Casas. The population begins to go down, partly because of the abuses of forced labor, but even more so by that stealthy enemy of the American natives to which I've already referred, smallpox. What had begun as a small epidemic becomes a catastrophe, an unimaginable catastrophe. Now, we know all about epidemics because we're just coming out of COVID. COVID is still present in many parts of the world. But COVID hasn't a patch on smallpox, if you give the pun, because patches are what first give the game away as far as a sufferer from smallpox. I referred to the fact that at the time of the arrival of the Spanish, it is estimated the population of Mexico was 30 million. Conservative estimates say that by 1570, only 50 years later, the population of Mexico was 3 million. Yes, 3 million. 90% of the native population died, almost entirely as a result of smallpox. This is how a small handful of Spanish were able to conquer, dominate, and then maintain control, not only of Mexico, but of all Central and South America so easily and for so long. The reason was smallpox. And of course, the Spanish continued to insist that smallpox was a gift from God. Yes, a gift from God. Imagine how they're able to interpret it. A gift from God, a sign of their superiority, a punishment on the natives for having been pagans and, in quotation marks, uncivilized. So this is the background to Juan Diego Cuauhtlac. He's become a believer, but he certainly does not believe in the political or social philosophy of the conquerors, nor is he convinced that it's the will of God, much less the will of God's mother, Mary. Just as another aside, the violence with which the Spanish employed or used against the native population in the conquest can put us in mind of violence that has been maintained through conquerors throughout history. And we've got a terrible example of that at the moment with Putin's Russian invasion of the Ukraine. So the awful things we're witnessing on our TV screens every night, unfortunately, are nothing new. They were employed by the Spanish against the Native Americans. They were employed by the Romans in their empire building, including against Jesus' own population. And of course, just 40 years after the death, resurrection, ascension of Jesus, the Romans would completely destroy Jerusalem and expel all the Jews from the Holy Land. So Romans against Jews, Spanish against Aztecs, the Russian army against Ukrainian civilians. This is nothing new. It was also the case in the Peru of the 1980s and 1990s. And that's the background of that Ascoy song that we heard earlier. So perhaps now, having drawn out the parallels of the violence of Juan Diego's time, Our Lady of Guadalupe's time, and our time, and the epidemics that were raging in Juan Diego's time, Guadalupe's time, and our time, we can continue with another piece of music from that same Luis Enrique Ascoy, again written, composed, and performed during those terrible years of war and suffering in Peru between 1980 and 2000. If you've got it there, Helena, there's a song of his called Patria. And Patria has a double meaning. It means our land, our home, our country. But it also means our spiritual home, our spiritual country, heaven, which is our true country, which we're aspiring to. But Ascoy says that our right to inherit our spiritual home depends on the degree to which we are building perfection here in our material home, here on earth. Let's look again. A last look now at the events of 1531 in the light of what we've seen from Mary in the Gospels and the Spanish conquest of Mexico. A time of violence, a time of misery, a time of epidemic, a time of death. But we mustn't lose hope. He is with us. And how do you know he's with us? A sign from his mother. Juan Diego Quatla Toatsin. Our Lady doesn't appear to a conqueror, but one of the conquered. She doesn't speak in the language of the conquest, Spanish, but in the language of the conquered, Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. She doesn't appear in the Spanish, newly constructed city of Mexico, but outside the town, on a hill, amidst the fields, tilled by the Native Americans. She doesn't appear in a church, but on the hill of Tepeyac, where there stands the ruins of an Aztec temple destroyed by the invading Spanish, signifying that former religions were not barbarous, they were not blasphemous, they were a preparation for the good news of Jesus Christ, just as the Old Testament was for the New Testament. She doesn't appear in European dress, but in the dress of an Aztec princess, thus elevating the dignity of the conquered culture. Off goes Juan Diego, Cuauhtémoc, and the conqueror, the European, the Spanish bishop, full of pride, is contemptuous of this nobody. But he is overcome by the power and love of God, expressed through the apparition of Our Lady. And even the epidemic which is raging has a sign of hope when Our Lady appears in person to Juan Diego's uncle and cures it. So this is not the dewy-eyed, butter wouldn't melt in the mouth image of Our Lady that we see so much of in our iconography in the Catholic Church today, in paintings and statues. This isn't a quiet, submissive, obedient, silent woman. This is the woman of Luke's Magnificat. This is a woman of Cana in John's Gospel. This is a woman of strength of character, faith-filled, strong-willed, articulate, passionate. This is a lady who's kind, who's joyful, who understands the mission of Jesus and anticipates it and carries it out and continues it today. This is a woman infused by anger and injustice of the social systems that oppress people, but promises through her intercession that God will lift the burden that crush so many of the poor and marginalised and prejudiced against and ignored. So this is, I think, the message of Guadalupe. It happened 500 years ago, but its message is as relevant today as it was then, perhaps even more so in the context of the violence of our times and the epidemics of our times and the social injustices of our times. And one last word, a closing word on the name. And this, if you like, was the conqueror's last throw of the dice. The apparition was in Tepeyac. However, the Spanish, who were in control, didn't want to give the name of the shrine a native name. So when Juan Diego Cuauhtémoc was speaking in Nahuatl, they couldn't really understand him fully, but they heard something that sounded like Guadalupe. So knowing there was a shrine in Spain called Guadalupe, they said, it must be the same one. So they transported a tradition from Spain and imposed it on the apparition and the shrine in Mexico. That's why it's not called Virgin of Tepeyac, which it should be, but Virgin of Guadalupe. And so it remains to this day. But we know now the truth of the story. So thanks very much, Eleanor. That's the sum total of the wisdom or otherwise I've got to impart. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Thanks for the music.
I was just talking to Father John about what he does on the weekends, since he's used to such an exciting life in Peru and in Latin America. What does he do here in what could be a cold, could be a wet, could be a rainy day? And he was just sharing about how he travels on the weekends to share the missionary work of the Columbans. Well, listeners, Father John, would you mind sharing that with them too? What do you do in England?
Yeah, the Mission Society of St. Columban was founded originally as the mission to Irish mission to China back in 1918. And in fact, our first mission was the now infamous city of Wuhan. Talking of epidemics, that I was able to visit myself just before the lockdown. I spent all my missionary life in Latin America, mainly in Peru. Returned last year to take up the reins as regional director or local superior here in Britain. So I'm in the office here in Birmingham, our head house. During weekdays, and then we have a mission promotion fundraising rota going around different dioceses at weekends. At the moment, we're active in Liverpool and Brentwood, but we also accept invitations for other parts of the country as well to go to groups, schools, individuals, benefactors. So I'll be up in Liverpool once more this coming weekend. Knotty Ash of Ken Dodd fame with your tickling stick. And after that, I've an invitation to go and do some talks in the Orkney Islands. So I'll be there for a few days. So I'm not going to Lima or Machu Picchu or Cochabamba these days, but I'm going to some really interesting and beautiful places in Britain. And don't worry about the rain. Lima, you might or might not know, is situated in the Atacama Desert, the driest desert in the world. I was there for 25 years, and in the Atacama, it's permanent high pressure, which means no clouds, no wind, no rain. So I love the rain.
Well, you know, we've got a caller actually coming on. This is our caller, John from Japan. Hello, John, you're on the air.
Thank you. I'll keep it very short. I'm a bit confused, actually, when I heard Father talking of Mary of Guadalupe as the most visited shrine in the world, surpassing Lourdes and Fatima. Well, I am confused because I've been looking forward to visit Lourdes all my life, and I hope one visit to be able to. I hope one day to be able to go. However, you know my problem, and this time, you know, my mind I have racing thoughts, so maybe I couldn't catch up correctly what Father said. But the idea that he gave me is that there are many different kinds of Marys. The Mary of Lourdes, the Mary of Fatima, the Mary of Guadalupe, like three different persons, you know. And eventually, Mary of Guadalupe is the best one.
Oh, so John, let's let Father John. What do you think?
An interesting point, and I'd just say one word to John, my namesake. That's a technical word, but it is very important these days. Inculturation. So our God and Mary, they manifest themselves in different cultures. It's the same God, it's the same Jesus, the same Mary, but they manifest themselves in tune with the local culture. So that's why you might find that the message of Mary in Lourdes, in Fatima, in Burang, in Bano, in Medjugorje, in Guadalupe is slightly different because she's appearing in different contexts. And therefore her message differs from place to place according to the culture, the history, and the time in which she's appearing. So don't worry, it's the same Mary. And Guadalupe just being the biggest shrine in terms of numbers of visitors, not in terms necessarily of depth of message or feeling or spirituality, just in terms of number of visitors. Imagine 22 million in 1 year. That's incredible.
And the Marys are not competing, right? It's not like who can get the most visitors. Go to Guadalupe, go to Lourdes. Although it might be a fun program, I don't know if Radio Maria will sponsor this, for John, Father John, maybe you and I can go to different shrines and try the different cafes' sausage rolls, and then we can compete. Who's got the best? Which Mary has the best sausage rolls?
The food and the drink, that's right. All part of enculturation.
Well, Father John, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for blessing us today with a history lesson, theological lesson, and inspiring us, hopefully, to maybe one day visit Our Lady in Mexico, or to go to our own places, our own local Marian shrines. We have plenty in England, to just spend some time with our own Lady, who is the same all over the world, but our own Lady in our countries. Father John, can I let you end the program with a prayer, please?
We pray to Almighty God that He might bless us in a time of epidemics and violence. We ask His prayer to the Father, through the Son, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, and the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, who is the Mother of Jesus, the Mother of God, and our Mother.
This was a Radio Maria podcast. If you enjoyed it, do please click like and subscribe on your podcast provider, or leave us a review. Every bit of feedback helps increase our visibility and allows us to reach more people with the message of Christ's saving truth.